Last step, we played with error responses for a non-existing user. When we send a request to retrieve the details of a non-existing user, we saw that we got a 404 response, which is good. And we also saw that there was a predefined structure which was made use of by Spring Boot. Having a proper error response structure is very, very important when it comes to enterprises. In your enterprise, you might not be following exactly the same structure as what is defined in here. You might have your own custom structure. In this step, let's explore how to create a custom structure for your exception response. Let's define a bean to represent your custom exception structure. So what I'll do is I'll go over to this package, do a Control N. I want to create a new class. I'll call this error details. Let's say as part of error details, I would want a timestamp when the error happened. And let's say I would want an error message. And I would also want to store the details of the error. Let's say this is the standard structure I would want to define across my enterprise. Before talking about the structure, let's actually move this error details class to a different package. I would create it in a package called exception. And do a Control-1 or Command-1, and I would say move error details.java to that specific package. Let's do that. Okay, now it's in the exception package. Now let's focus on the structure of the error details that we want to have. We would want to have a timestamp. So private local date timestamp, and message would be string, private string message. And we would have private string details as well. Let's do an organize imports. Java time local date is imported in, and I would want to create a constructor. Right click, source, generate constructor using fields. I'll use all the fields in here. So let's do a generate of the constructor, and let's also generate the getters and setters. Right click, source, generate getters and setters. I don't need the setters, so let's just go for getters. So select getters only, and I would want to insert it as the last member. So let's go ahead and say generate. This looks good. So we have the error details object created. Now what do we want to do? Whenever an exception happens, we want to return it in this specific structure. How can we do that? Before we get there, let's first look at how Spring is implementing this exception handling. There is a common structure which is defined by Spring. How is it implemented? If I go over and search for a class called response entity exception handler and say open. So you can see that this is the standard class which handles all Spring MVC raised exceptions. And it returns formatted error details. So if you look at the different methods which are present in here, there are a wide variety of methods to react to different kinds of exceptions. And the fundamental exception handling method is handle exception, which is present in here. Handle exception, exception web request. So let's take that method, handle exception. This is where the standard structure is coming in from. So what we want to do now is we would want to override this and provide our own implementation. How can we do that? That's where we can extend this specific class. We can extend response entity exception handler class and create our own exception handling code. So let's do. So what I'll do is in this specific package, I'll go ahead and create a new class. I don't want to call this customized response entity exception handler, and I'll say finish. And what we want to do is to extends response entity exception handler. Do a Control-1 or Command-1 and do an import. Org Spring Framework Web Servlet MVC method annotation response entity exception handler. And now we want to customize the implementation of the handle exception method. So I can go in here, go over to handle exception method, get the signature of it. So we need to exactly follow that signature. So we need to have some method like this. And over here, we can define what kind of exceptions we would want to handle. So at exception handler is how you define what exceptions you'd want to handle. At exception handler, we'd want to handle all exceptions. Exception.class. Let's do an organize imports. You can see that exception handler is now imported in. That looks good. What I want to do in here is to create my own custom exception object. So let's do error details. Error details is equal to new error details of, the first one is the timestamp. The first one is the timestamp. So I'll say local date dot nav. The second parameter is the description. Let's do exception dot get message. And the third parameter in here are the details. For now, let's just say request dot get description and pass a parameter of false. Let's save this. And what we would now need to do is to return a response entity back. So let's create a new response entity. We want to send the error details back. And what is the status that we would want to send back? The status that we'll send back is internal server error. So HTTP status dot internal server error. And let's do a return of this and save this out. Now we'll also need to rename this method. So I'll say handle all exceptions. So what we are doing in here is we are making use of our own custom exception structure and we are returning it back as the response. Let's save this and let's see if our code is working. So let's send a GET request to a non-existing user and say send. You're getting a 404. However, you're getting it still in the same old structure. Why? Because this class is not yet picked up by Spring Framework. Let's add a controller advice. So let's make this applicable to all the controllers and REST controllers which are defined in this specific project. Controller advice. Let's do an organize imports. So you can see that org Spring Framework web bind annotation controller advice is imported in. If you look at controller advice, it's a specialization of component for classes that declare exception handlers. You can also do something called init binding, and you can also define common modal attributes to be shared across multiple controller classes by making use of controller advice. So let's go ahead, save this and fire the request again. And now you would see that your customized error response structure is coming back. Right now you can see that the timestamp only has the date. If you want to actually have the time information as well, instead of local date, what we can do is we can make use of local date time. So I can change this to local date time instead of local date. Let's quickly make that change. Local date time, and this will also return local date time. And let's organize imports, save this, and go over to customize response entity exception handler. And over here, it would be local date time.nav and organize imports again. And now everywhere we are now switching over from local date to local date time. Let's see what would happen now. Let's do a send. And now you can see that you have the complete timestamp in here. So you have the date and the timestamp as well. And we are defining everything in our own custom structure. Now, once we defined our own custom structure, what we are observing is the fact that for user not found exception, we are returning a 500 back. However, for user not found exception, I would want to return a bad request back. How can I do that? That's where I can customize this further. So for all exceptions, I would want to do this, but for user not found exception alone. So if a user not found exception happens, I would actually rename this method handle user not found exception. If a user not found exception happens, then I would want to return a different message back. Let's organize the inputs. User not found exception is imported in at the top. And instead of internal server error, I would want to return HTTP status dot not found. So that's the one which we want to return back. Let's save this and refresh. So you can see now that we are getting a 404 in a customized structure that is defined by us. Now I see a warning saying response entity is a raw type. What we can do is to configure a customized one. So we are going to use error details. So let's make this as well error details, and the same in here as well. So we would want to return response entity with this structure back. So let's change that and let's execute the request again, and you'd see that the same error response is coming back. Giving the right message back to your consumers is very, very important. And in the case of REST API, the way you can send the details out to your consumers is through the response and the response status. Having the right error structure when something goes wrong and having the right response status is very, very important when it comes to REST API. In the last couple of steps, we explored some of the important options that Spring MVC provides for you to handle errors gracefully and return the right response structure and response status. I'm sure you're having a wonderful time, and I'll see you in the next step.